3 coffins lay in the frost, nailed shut before dawn. Yet inside, the bodies moved. The sound of fingernails scratching against pine wood echoed across Bramble Holler, a sound that would haunt the Appalachian Mountains forever. This wasn't a burial, it was a warning. In 1836, the Ashbourne Triplets were born under a winter moon, 3 children who never cried, never laughed, and never once blinked when the rest of the world expected them to. For 18 years, the holler whispered about their silence. Livestock vanished, wells soured, and neighbors swore they felt watched even when alone. No law, no preacher, no father could contain them. And when their 18th birthday arrived, the mountains learned the truth. Silence wasn't absence, it was preparation. What the Ashbourne Triplets became that night was so terrifying that their story was erased from history books. But you're about to hear it now. Before we descend deeper into Bramble Holler's darkness, take a second to ground yourself. Stories like this spread because people carry them. Across generations, across state lines, across campfires where silence feels dangerous. So if this tale already has you hooked, hit subscribe, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and share this with a friend who thinks legends can't hurt them. Because the next chapter proves that legends don't just live in stories. Sometimes they live in people. The mountain wind tore through Bramble Holler on the longest night of the year, rattling shutters loose and whistling through cabin gaps, while inside the Ashbourne cabin 3 cries never came, only silence heavy as stone. Instead of wails, stillness filled the air, pressing against the ears of every man present. The triplets emerged one after another, eyes open, unblinking, unnervingly calm, staring at the world with unnatural awareness. Mortimer Ashbourne, a hard mountain farmer with hands broken by soil and stone, stood stunned as he watched his sons arrive without sound. Their eyes cut deeper than any blade he'd ever handled. Neighbors whispered later that the wind changed that night, carrying not just frost's bite, but the metallic tang of something darker, as if the mountain itself exhaled blood into Bramble Holler. Marcus Wesley, the old doctor who delivered countless boys across these ridges, swore afterward these sons weren't like others. They seemed connected, synchronized, a single thought passing silently between them, their stares carrying something no infant should hold. As the boys grew, the silence never lifted. Where other children shouted, argued, or played, the triplets stood watching, their gazes heavy enough to make grown men mutter and shift uneasily in their presence. By the time they walked, their steps landed together, heel to toe in perfect rhythm, echoing down dirt paths with eerie precision. Men noticed. Neighbors stopped inviting them near, uneasy under those relentless eyes. At gatherings, they sat motionless beside Mortimer, hands folded neatly, faces expressionless. When spoken to, they answered in one voice, calm, measured, every word carrying the weight of something older than childhood. Rumors spread through the holler about their stillness. Chickens vanished from coops, hounds refused to hunt near Ashbourne land, and hunters swore they saw the boys standing silent at tree lines past midnight. The preacher, Josiah Thornvale, shivered when the triplets took the front bench in his chapel. They never blinked. He lost his place mid-sermon as those eyes drilled into him with unrelenting intensity. Afterward, Josiah confided to Mortimer that something about them unsettled him. Mortimer shrugged, saying they were quiet boys, nothing more. Yet his hands trembled as he poured another drink late that evening. Years passed. The silence deepened. The boys grew into lean young men, shoulders broad from farm work, yet moving with the strange grace of shadows, never stumbling, never faltering, always steady in their rhythm. Neighbors avoided them, though few spoke openly. The mountains taught men not to meddle in another family's burden. Still, whispers carried along trails that the triplets weren't entirely natural, maybe not entirely human. Crops near the Ashbourne farm soured, corn growing with gray husks, beans with black veins, water from the family's well tasting metallic. Men muttered that some bloodlines brought curses heavier than frost. Livestock disappeared, sometimes drained, sometimes found arranged in deliberate patterns across fields as though placed by careful hands. The geometry was too exact, too purposeful, beyond the instincts of any predator. The triplets themselves never seemed harmed. No fevers, no broken bones, not even scratches from briars. They were untouched by the small cruelties of mountain life, preserved as though protected by unseen hands. Mortimer aged badly. Neighbors saw him slumped drunk on his porch more often than working his land. His sons required no guidance, and perhaps that truth frightened him most of all. By their 12th year, the boys began speaking less, relying on glances and gestures. A raised brow, a twitch of lips, a slow nod, enough to finish thoughts no one else could hear. Phineas Coldbrook, a neighbor, swore one autumn evening he caught the triplets studying him from the tree line, their stares sharp, deliberate, unbroken until he fled indoors, convinced he'd been measured and judged. Men tried ignoring them, but their presence carried weight. Young boys returned shaken after playing near Ashbourne Land, whispering that the triplets mouthed words they couldn't hear, but somehow understood inside their heads. Some children developed sudden fevers, gone as quickly as they came. They awoke quieter, less playful, eyes shadowed. Fathers avoided speaking aloud what they suspected, that something had passed between their sons. By their 15th year, the triplets spoke little and smiled never. They moved like predators conserving strength. When they entered a room, conversation died as men felt the instinct to fall silent. Mortimer drank more, his face collapsing into hollows. Neighbors avoided conversation. Men who once called him brother now offered only curt nods, unwilling to acknowledge aloud what everyone read in his weary eyes. Hounds growled near the Ashbourne Trail. Horses balked. The mountain itself seemed to withdraw, gardens withering near their cabin, trees groaning though no wind blew. Men felt ground pulse beneath their boots like a heartbeat. The boys worked the farm with flawless rhythm, motions mirrored, each swing of axe or hoe identical. Neighbors swore watching them felt like observing a ritual, not ordinary labor under the sun. By 17, their silence felt sharpened, honed. When they spoke, their words cut with unnatural weight. Even hardened men felt compelled to listen, compelled to obey, as though silence itself carried command. One morning, Phineas Coldbrook discovered his prized bull bloodless in pasture, throat cut clean as steel, no tracks, no struggle, no explanation, only silence heavier than the mountain pressing against his chest. The preacher trembled during service that week. The triplets sat front and center, watching. When Josiah lifted his eyes, he swore one of them smiled. Just a fraction, but enough to freeze him. Men gathered afterward, voices hushed. Some muttered curses, others whispered about mountain shadows and evil blood. None dared speak openly, for to accuse meant to confront, and no one dared enter that cabin. Mortimer's shoulders bent beneath a weight he couldn't name. His hands shook on his rifle, though he never raised it against his sons. They were his, yet not his, flesh-born but foreign spirit. Hollers thrive on silence as much as words. Men avoided asking questions they didn't want answered. When livestock kept dying and boys kept changing, they muttered prayers and walked away quickly. By the triplets' 18th year, the silence had sharpened into purpose. It was no longer absence but intention, a gathering storm waiting for release, a quiet rehearsed for something far more terrible. That autumn, fathers saw their sons gathering at tree lines, standing motionless, blank-faced. They dragged them home, but their silence remained contagious, heavy as winter air settling across the holler before snow. Dr. Fairfax rode into the holler, a circuit physician who trusted only science. Even he admitted unease when his horse refused to step toward the Ashbourne path, wide-eyed, nostrils flared in terror. He wrote in his journal of strange marks carved into boys' shoulders, 3 interlocking circles. They looked deliberate, surgical, impossible for children to create themselves proof of practiced hands shaping them into something else. Fairfax offered rational explanations: hysteria, isolation, suggestion. Yet at night he dreamed of 3 unblinking faces at his bedside, silent, waiting, promising something his waking mind refused to name. By winter, the Holler's boys grew unnervingly quiet. Laughter thinned. Play ended. Fathers found them awake at night, staring toward the Ashbourne farm, lips moving silently, eyes unfocused as though awaiting command. When questioned, they whispered in unison, speaking words their fathers didn't recognize. Phrases older than scripture, heavy as stone, carrying the taste of iron and smoke across their tongues. The mountain air thickened with dread. Men locked doors, though locks meant nothing against silence. They sharpened blades, though blades meant little against what killed without motion. They prayed, though prayers felt ignored. Mortimer stood on his porch, whiskey jug in hand, watching his sons across the yard. They stood in perfect formation, gazes fixed on him, patient, waiting, embodying silence sharpened into destiny. The Holler men gathered one last time that winter. They sat in the schoolhouse, lamplight flickering, breath clouding the air. The question pressed heavier than any storm. What happens when silence becomes a weapon? The answer would come soon, though none knew it then. It waited in their 18th year, when silence would finally break and Bramble Holler would never again belong to ordinary men. Frost clung to the Holler when Phineas Coldbrook discovered his prized bull lying lifeless, throat cut with unnatural precision, blood gone without a trace. No tracks, no struggle, only silence pressing against the dawn. He stared at the wound, a perfect line too clean for claws or teeth, too deliberate for accident. This was butcher's work, he muttered. Though no butcher wasted meat, no butcher drained blood. Word spread quickly, and men gathered at the fence line, muttering beneath their breath. Losing livestock meant danger, but losing blood meant something worse. Blood had purpose, blood had meaning, and meaning terrified mountain men. The triplets stood at the burial, silent at the edge of the field, eyes fixed on the carcass as it disappeared beneath dirt. One of them smiled, faint, satisfied, then returned to silence. Josiah Thornvale, the preacher, caught the smile, and his skin crawled. Later, he admitted it chilled him more than the carcass, for it suggested knowledge, a secret satisfaction as though the bull's death was ritual. That evening, as hearth fires glowed, voices rose across the Holler in whispered arguments. Some swore predators grew bold. Others insisted predators did not smile. The shadows outside cabins lengthened, carrying unease deeper into bone. 2 nights later, chickens were found in a circle, unbroken, bodies intact, eyes clouded white. No blood remained. Men who saw the sight turned pale, muttering curses, and one abandoned his farm outright. Marcus Wesley, old doctor of the Holler, studied the dead chickens and recalled details of the triplets' birth. Eyes unblinking, silence unbroken, 3 circles marked faintly on their shoulders like symbols carved in flesh. Blood calls to blood, he whispered to himself, remembering his grandfather's warnings about certain lineages best avoided. But this wasn't memory, it was present, breathing, and its silence now consumed the Holler. Strange singing drifted down from the Ashbourne cabin that night. Not words, but a hum in 3 parts, harmonized so perfectly it unsettled every ear. Men woke sweating, claiming they heard it in dreams. The animals refused to approach Ashbourne land. Horses bucked, hounds whimpered, cattle pulled against ropes. Something in the air pressed heavy, sour, metallic, as though every living beast recognized what men tried to deny. Dr. Fairfax returned, summoned by whispers of sickness spreading. Fathers described sons waking in barns, eyes rolled white, muttering about the silent brothers who watched and taught them. Silence was spreading like infection. Fairfax found marks burned into shoulders of boys, 3 circles, interlocking. Under magnification, they appeared deliberate, carved with precision, not scratches, not accidents. His hands trembled as he traced the wounds, unable to explain. Each marked boy carried new stillness. They obeyed commands, they ate when fed, but something had dimmed. Their gazes carried calculation far beyond their years, and fathers turned away, hearts breaking, prayers failing. By November's first frost, 7 boys bore the marks. Each had vanished briefly, only to return silent, changed, staring at tree lines as though awaiting further instruction. Fathers dragged them indoors, but silence remained. The marked gathered each dusk near the woods. They stood in formation, motionless until dragged home. Their stillness mirrored the triplets, as if rehearsing for a role only the silent understood. Phineas Coldbrook watched his son Thomas fall under that influence. The boy sat at supper like a stranger, face expressionless, refusing to meet his father's eyes. Phineas trembled, whispering, "That ain't my boy." Josiah Thornvale's grandson Samuel was taken next. He vanished 2 days, returned marked, eyes older, carrying silence into the church pew. Josiah's faith faltered as he admitted he no longer recognized his own blood. Each disappearance followed the same rhythm, gone for days, returned scarred, returned altered. Fathers gathered in private, whispering fears that spread faster than frost. They knew silence wasn't natural, it was invasion. Marcus Wesley argued it was manipulation, knowledge twisted into control. Yet even he admitted unease when instruments turned cold near the triplets. He confessed dreams haunted him, visions of 3 sons beckoning from shadows. Snow fell early, whitening the holler, but silence darkened deeper than ever. Boys stood at tree lines longer. Fathers shouted, begged, threatened, but still they stood, faces blank, breaths rising in rhythm like chants. Dr. Fairfax's journal grew frantic. He described catatonia induced deliberately, scarification executed with anatomical knowledge. But he could not record what his heart feared. That silence was more than control. It was transformation. The triplets walked the holler like kings. Their presence carried authority beyond speech. Men avoided crossing their path, for their eyes lingered too long, heavy with certainty, as though measuring men for burial. Mortimer Ashbourne, once proud, now crumbled. His shoulders stooped, his hands shook, his whiskey jug never emptied. Neighbors pitied him, but none dared speak. Fathers knew. He lived with shadows no man could escape. Community meetings grew tense. In the schoolhouse, fathers argued. Some said leave, flee to valleys where silence couldn't follow. Others warned distance meant nothing. Silence lived in minds, not places. Silence was pursuit. Through frosted windows of the meeting house, fathers saw shadows at tree lines. Child-sized figures stood still in formation. The marked listened, eyes reflecting lamplight, their silence louder than any shouting inside. Phineas slammed his fist on the desk, demanding action. "They're building something with our sons," he growled. Josiah whispered that resistance might be hopeless, but his voice shook with the truth none wanted spoken. Dr. Fairfax urged reason, claiming human methods, yet even he admitted dreams of the triplets at his bedside, silent, commanding. Science crumbled before shadows, and reason dissolved into fear gnawing at every heart. By month's end, 13 boys stood marked. Fathers pulled them home, but each night they returned to tree lines, arranged in circles, humming low tones that matched the mountain's heartbeat. Silence had become song. Phineas wept when Thomas turned away from his outstretched hand, returning to formation without hesitation. His shout echoed across the holler, but the boy did not flinch, did not blink, only breathed silence. The marked no longer spoke. Their stillness infected fathers' homes, supper tables turning cold. Men confess they felt watched within their own cabins, as though silence itself seeped through every crack. Snow deepened. Men sharpened rifles, polished revolvers, muttering plans whispered between clenched teeth. Yet all felt futility gnawing at them, for how could bullets strike silence? How could powder ignite against shadows? Mortimer sat alone on his porch, staring at his sons as they walked past, 3 shadows in formation. He whispered to the night, "They were mine once, but not anymore." The triplets began humming openly as they passed through the holler, 3 voices braided into one vibration. Men clutched their ears, yet the sound bypassed hearing, crawling straight into nerves, into marrow. The boys who heard it grew stiller, slower, more compliant. Silence spread like frost across glass, creeping into every cabin. Fathers prayed harder, though faith now felt like sand slipping through fingers. Dr. Fairfax documented the humming, calling it mass hypnosis. Yet his hand shook as he wrote, for he knew hypnosis left choice. This silence allowed no choice. It erased, reshaped, devoured. By late November, Bramble Holler had transformed. Men spoke in whispers. Children no longer laughed. Smoke from chimneys curled thin, fragile. Silence hung heavier than snow, crushing every breath, every prayer, every hope. The triplets had hollowed Bramble Holler. They carved silence into its bones, claimed sons from fathers, and prepared something greater, something darker. The mountain groaned, knowing the worst was still yet to come. Snow crusted the holler in brittle white when the triplets' quiet became command. Fathers awoke to discover their sons missing, only to find them standing at the tree line, waiting, silent, arranged in formation. 13 boys now stood shoulder to shoulder, their breaths rising in rhythm like smoke from a single fire. Their gazes fixed toward the ash-born cabin, unblinking, patient, and their silence pressed heavier than storm clouds. Fathers dragged them home, but each boy returned by dusk, pulled as if tethered by invisible cords. No whip, no threat, no pleading broke their resolve. They belonged elsewhere, to silence itself. The triplets moved among them, their steps deliberate, their motions mirrored, each gesture echoed by the boys. Observers whispered it resembled drill, as though an army was forming beneath the mountain's shadow. Phineas Coldbrook stood helpless as his son Thomas mimicked the triplets' movements. When one raised his hand, all raised theirs. When one tilted his head, all followed. Obedience had replaced individuality. Josiah Thornvale prayed harder, but his grandson Samuel sat at the supper table in silence, chewing slowly, watching his grandfather with cold detachment. It was the gaze of a stranger inhabiting blood. Dr. Fairfax documented the boys' synchronized behavior, describing it as group hypnosis reinforced by shared ritual. Yet his notes grew frantic as he admitted the coordination surpassed human suggestion, sliding into something supernatural. The triplets hummed each night, voices weaving through the holler. The marked boys joined, their tones low, resonant, blending until the mountains seemed to hum back. Silence had grown into sound, and sound into dominion. Marcus Wesley approached the tree line once, clutching a lantern, determined to study the gathering. He froze when every head turned toward him in unison, eyes blank yet purposeful. His courage cracked. He staggered back. The men of Bramble Holler gathered again in the schoolhouse. Oil lamps flickered, casting shadows that felt too numerous. Their breaths fogged, their voices cracked. They argued over action, but silence already infiltrated. Phineas slammed the table, declaring the boys had been taken. Others muttered escape, abandoning homes, leaving silence behind. Josiah argued leaving meant nothing. Silence lived within their sons now, carried like sickness through marrow. Dr. Fairfax urged restraint, clinging to science. He insisted men, no matter how disciplined, could be resisted. But as he spoke, his hands trembled, remembering dreams where the triplets stood over his bed, whispering nothing, Outside, shadows of boys flickered against the snow, still standing at the tree line, still listening. Men grew quiet, for they knew decisions made inside carried beyond walls, carried straight into silence itself. The marked boys began refusing food from fathers, yet none starved. They moved with strength, their eyes gleaming faintly at night as though fed by something unseen. Men whispered of unnatural nourishment. At dawn, fathers discovered their sons gone again, standing at the tree line with frost crusting their lashes. Yet none shivered. Silence protected them, hardened them, shaping them into something no longer entirely human. The triplets themselves walked taller, more commanding, every step deliberate. Their presence forced men to avert their eyes, as though to look too long risked being marked. Authority radiated from them, unquestioned, unstoppable. Mortimer Ashbourne staggered through snow, his face gaunt, whiskey jug swinging. He muttered that his sons were lost long ago. None corrected him. Fathers pitied, but also feared, for perhaps he spoke truth. The humming grew louder, carrying across the holler, resonant in timber walls, rattling glass panes. Even unmarked men woke at night, their lips unconsciously mouthing words they had never learned, repeating syllables older than language. Fairfax described this as auditory infection, though privately he admitted fear that the sound burrowed deeper, beyond ears, embedding itself in nerves. He confessed to Marcus Wesley that silence now lived inside him, too. The marked boys began gathering not only at dusk, but throughout the day, arranged in perfect rows like soldiers drilled by invisible sergeants. Their stillness unnerved even hardened hunters who once feared nothing. Phineas caught Thomas carving 3 circles into wood, his hand steady, his face blank. When confronted, the boy only stared, silent, the carved symbol repeating endlessly until his father ripped it from his grasp. Josiah wept when Samuel led younger boys into formation, no longer follower but officer. His prayers faltered, his faith cracked, for he realized silence elevated some to command within this growing army. Men whispered that the triplets were building more than followers. They were building hierarchy, ranks, structure. Silence wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was a doctrine, a campaign, a war waiting to be declared. Snow deepened, and still the army grew. 17, then 20 boys stood marked, moving in rhythm. Their boots crunched snow together, their breaths matched, their heads turned simultaneously toward whatever the triplets desired. The holler became battlefield without battle. Smoke curled thinner, voices fell softer. Every man knew war approached, though none understood its rules. Silence was the weapon, and silence already owned their sons. One night, the boys marched in formation across the settlement. Doors slammed shut, curtains drawn. Men watched from cracks as their children passed like shadows, silent ranks echoing with synchronized breath, echoing inevitability. Phineas gripped his revolver, hand trembling. He considered firing into the night, breaking the silence with thunder, but his son marched past, expression void, and he could not bring himself to pull the trigger. Fairfax scribbled by lantern light, describing the march as ritualized domination. Yet he knew rituals end with culmination. He wrote one final line before his ink froze. They are not preparing. They are already enacting. Marcus Wesley studied unmarked boys, checking shoulders for scars. Each day he found more. Fathers no longer brought sons willingly, fearing discovery meant inevitability. Fear itself became contagion, and silence thrived in its shadow. By December's first week, 25 boys stood claimed. The holler felt empty, cabins echoing with absence. Silence walked heavier, filling spaces where laughter once lived. Fathers confessed they could not remember their sons' voices. The triplets led the army into the woods, vanishing for hours. When they returned, the boys' boots dripped with mud from places no man recognized. They had been somewhere else, somewhere outside human geography. Hunters trailed them once, but turned back trembling. They swore the trees moved, paths rearranged, time twisted. They returned pale, muttering they had followed their own footsteps into places that should not exist. Mortimer sat on his porch when they returned, watching his sons march at the head. He whispered into the night, "They've stopped being mine. They belong to something else now." The men of Bramble Holler finally agreed. Confrontation was inevitable. Phineas demanded rifles be readied. Josiah warned faith alone was brittle. Fairfax whispered reason was useless. All agreed silence must be met, or all would vanish. Yet as they plotted, silence already listened. Boys at the tree line stood perfectly still, snow dusting their shoulders, their eyes blank but aware. Every word spoken inside was heard beyond walls. The army of silence had been built, disciplined, and prepared. It no longer mattered what fathers decided. Their children no longer belonged to them. The triplets had claimed them, and war loomed inevitable. Snow fell hard across Bramble Holler when men gathered for the final time, rifles polished, revolvers oiled, determination carved into tired faces. They had watched long enough. Silence could no longer go unchallenged. Phineas Coldbrook led them, his revolver strapped tight, boots crunching frost. His son no longer answered his voice, and that truth burned hotter than whiskey, hotter than fire. He would act tonight. Beside him marched Josiah Thornvale, preacher turned soldier, faith fraying but not yet broken. He carried his rifle with trembling hands, whispering prayers under his breath, though his eyes showed he expected no answers. Dr. Fairfax joined despite every instinct screaming against violence. His medical oath bound him to heal, not kill, yet he knew silence had hollowed more souls than any plague he ever studied. Marcus Wesley followed with steady steps, his lantern casting shadows across the snow. He had seen silence carve itself into boys' shoulders. He carried not just a weapon, but knowledge of anatomy. 7 men in total walked toward the Ashbourne cabin, their breath fogging the air, boots breaking ice-crusted snow. Behind them lay cabins, half empty. Fathers stripped of sons, neighbors consumed by dread thicker than smoke. Through frosted windows they saw the triplets sitting at a table, hands folded, expressions calm. They did not flinch at the sight of armed men surrounding their home. They simply waited. Mortimer Ashbourne stepped outside before them, gaunt, broken, whiskey lingering on his breath. His eyes sagged with exhaustion, but behind them lay resignation. He whispered, "You can't hurt them. They're still my sons." Phineas spat into the snow, hand hovering near his revolver. "Are they?" he growled. "Because what walks out of your cabin at night isn't sons. It's something wearing their faces." The door creaked again, and the triplets emerged, dressed in dark coats, moving in perfect unison. Their gazes swept across the armed men, calm, deliberate, patient. Silence thickened, turning snow into suffocating air. Essie spoke first, voice smooth as still water. "We've been expecting you." His brothers followed, their words linking seamlessly. "You've lost something. You think hurting us will bring it back, but nothing returns." The men hesitated, rifles raised but fingers frozen. The cadence of their speech pressed against nerves like invisible chains. Even veterans of war felt their courage waver as silence wove itself around them. Phineas clenched his jaw, forcing his revolver higher. His trigger finger twitched, yet his chest tightened. He tried to speak, but only breath escaped, caught in a net spun of soundless command. The triplets began to hum, low at first, then rising, 3 voices blending into vibrations that bypassed ears entirely. It struck marrow, slowed muscles, locked jaws. Men froze where they stood, breath shallow. Fairfax felt his rifle slip from numb hands, snow swallowing the weapon. He screamed inside, yet his throat refused sound. His heart hammered, but even that rhythm began matching the hum. Essie circled slowly, eyes gleaming faintly. Children trust. They follow. Bessie moved opposite, footsteps careful. Adults resist. They question. Desi completed the triangle, smile thin. But eventually, all learned silence. All kneel. Phineas's son, Thomas, stepped from the tree line, snow clinging to his shoulders, face empty. He approached calmly, eyes void, walking toward the cabin as though his father's presence meant nothing at all. Tears froze on Phineas's cheeks as his hand trembled, revolver dropping uselessly. He reached out, but Thomas passed without recognition, joining the triplets' circle, his silence heavier than bullets ever fired. The humming swelled, vibrating the cabin walls, seeping into the trees, crawling across the holler. Men's knees buckled, rifles clattered to snow. Breath became impossible. They collapsed, kneeling as though in prayer to silence. Fairfax's journal, written later with shaking hand, would describe cataleptic paralysis, mass hypnosis beyond comprehension. Yet in that moment, science failed entirely. Only terror remained, and silence claimed victory without spilling blood. The triplets' voices overlapped again, soft yet commanding. You came with weapons. But weapons cannot wound silence. You will serve as others serve. Their words slithered into thoughts, leaving no space for defiance. Mortimer watched from the porch, shoulders hunched. He whispered hoarsely, I told you, they're still my sons. Yet even he knew the truth. They were something else now, something no father could name. The marked boys stood behind the triplets, breathing in perfect rhythm, eyes blank. Snow fell heavier, muffling the world, yet inside that muffling grew the only sound that mattered. The endless humming. Phineas tried once more, teeth clenched, forcing breath into words. You can't take everything, he gasped. But silence drowned him. His voice disappeared mid-sentence, swallowed whole, leaving only the echo of futility. One by one, the armed men knelt, rifles abandoned, hands limp. Their eyes glazed, mirroring their sons. Silence had claimed fathers as surely as it claimed children. Resistance had lasted minutes, nothing more. The humming softened, settling like snowfall. The triplets stood victorious, not through bloodshed but through will. They had turned rifles to relics, faith to ash, defiance to obedience. Silence reigned supreme in Bramble Holler. Josiah's head dropped, prayers dying on lips that no longer formed words. He realized belief meant nothing here. Silence was God, and God demanded not worship but surrender, total and absolute. Fairfax's vision blurred as his body knelt without command. His mind screamed rebellion, but silence numbed even thought, smothering spark. He realized he was no longer observer but subject, studied as part of an experiment. Phineas's tears froze on his face as he bowed against his will, revolver lying abandoned. His last coherent thought echoed. His son now marched for silence, and he had failed to save him. The triplets stepped closer, studying each kneeling man with clinical precision. Essie whispered, Strength is learned. Bessie added, Weakness too. Desi concluded, All serve silence. Their words echoed through marrow, binding will to theirs. When dawn broke, the schoolhouse bell tolled 13 times without a hand touching its rope. Snow glittered bloodless, yet 7 men knelt outside the Ashbourne cabin, their weapons abandoned, their silence absolute. Inside his journal, Fairfax's final clear entry captured the event. They induce paralysis with sound, command will with silence. This is not suggestion, it is domination. We are no longer men, only extensions. The mountain itself seemed quieter that morning. Trees groaned less, wind stilled. Bramble Holler belonged not to men, but to silence. The revolt had failed before it began, crushed without fire or blade. Mortimer sat staring into snow, whiskey spilling from his hand. He mumbled, They were mine. They ain't mine anymore. No man answered, for no man had words left after silence claimed them. The marked boys marched at dawn, their fathers now trailing behind in step, unwilling, unthinking. The army had grown, no longer only children. Silence had gained men, rifles, and every soul it desired. The holler lay hushed, cabins abandoned, smoke thin. Men who once boasted of courage now moved as shadows among shadows. Their revolt had ended not with victory, but with surrender carved into bone. The triplets stood at the center, gazes fixed on the mountain horizon. Their silence was no longer rehearsal. It was doctrine. Their army, now fathers and sons alike, was ready for something far greater. Snow fell again, covering tracks, covering weapons, covering every trace of resistance. Only silence remained, heavy and eternal. Bramble Holler had been conquered without war, claimed by sons who no longer belonged to men. December arrived cloaked in white silence, but beneath that snow, something older stirred. The triplets walked taller, sharper, their eyes gleaming silver in lamplight. The Holler's men knew change approached, though none grasped its scale. The marked gathered in rows outside the Ashbourne cabin, now numbering sons and fathers alike. Their breaths rose in unison, their shadows stretching unnaturally across snow. Silence thickened into ritual, into waiting. Dr. Fairfax, still half himself, scribbled frantically. His journal spoke of evolution beyond humanity, of silence reshaping flesh and thought. He wrote, "Their birthday nears. Something final, something irreversible, something ancient waits inside." Phineas Coldbrook stood at his cabin window, watching Thomas among the marked. His boy's posture rigid, his eyes vacant, his silence heavier than death. Phineas whispered, "What will you become, son?" The triplets prepared with precision. Lanterns burned all night in their cabin. Strange symbols appeared etched in frost across windows. Men swore the light pulsed, as though something inside breathed with the mountain itself. Mortimer Ashbourne stumbled across his porch, whiskey jug forgotten, eyes hollow. He muttered, "They're waiting for it. 18 years for this." No man answered. They feared his truth more than his madness. The night before their birthday, the marked gathered in concentric rings around the cabin. Snow fell steadily, but none moved, none shivered. Their stillness felt unnatural, a congregation awaiting revelation. Inside, humming shifted to words. Not English, not Latin, but something older, jagged, echoing through marrow. Men huddled in cabins clutched their ears, yet the words bypassed hearing, embedding themselves into bone. Marcus Wesley cracked open his ancient medical texts, desperate for reason. None offered answers. He whispered, "They're not men anymore." His voice trembled, for even science felt like myth before what silence had birthed. The schoolhouse bell tolled 13 times, though no rope moved. Its voice rolled across snow, vibrating the holler. Men trembled. They knew midnight marked the end of waiting. The becoming would begin. When the door opened, the triplets stepped out clothed in white garments that shimmered like frost-lit moonlight. Their faces glowed unnaturally, symmetrical beyond human design, eyes mirrors reflecting nothing but endless silver. The marked knelt instantly, heads bowed. Fathers, sons, neighbors, all hushed by instinct, not command. The triplets raised curved blades gleaming in moonlight, tools resembling surgery more than weaponry. The air itself seemed to bow. Fairfax scrawled with frantic hands. "They are not human. They were never human. They are vessels, incubators for something far older. Tonight they revealed true form." His script jagged, ink blotched by shaking. Phineas staggered through snow, revolver in hand, but froze as Thomas's shadow detached, writhing, stretching, reaching toward the triplets. Shadows of every marked body moved, flowing like rivers toward the brothers. The ground trembled as shadows converged, seeping into the triplets' forms. Their bodies stretched taller, proportions twisting into symmetry unnatural to human design. Their garments dissolved into liquid light, skin glowing with spectral luminescence. Mortimer fell to his knees, whispering, "Not sons, never sons." He wept silently, though no tears fell. His words vanished into air thick with humming, with transformation, with the birth of something unspeakable. The triplets' voices merged, no longer three, but one, vibrating in every chest. 18 years, it resonated. 18 years of silence. Tonight, silence becomes voice. Tonight, voice becomes dominion. Men clutched ears, yet the words came from inside, bypassing sound. They felt memories rifled, fears catalogued, strength stripped. No thought was private. Silence read them, consumed them, bent them toward obedience. Shadows finished their feast, leaving bodies hollow. Marked boys and men collapsed, husks drained of essence, their shells littered snow, eyes vacant, mouths frozen mid-breath. Silence fed, and silence left nothing behind. The triplets stood transformed, taller than men, bodies gleaming, features perfect yet unbearable to behold. Their eyes mirrored silver horizons, their voices thundered without sound. The becoming had arrived, and Bramble Holler was undone. Phineas dropped his revolver, teeth clenched against tears. He whispered, "Son, forgive me." But forgiveness never came. Thomas lay motionless in snow, emptied, offered as sacrifice for something beyond comprehension. Josiah staggered forward, Bible falling from his hands. "What are you?" he cried. The voices answered inside his mind. "We are silence given flesh. We are hunger clothed in form. We are becoming." Fairfax collapsed, clutching his chest. His final entry scrawled, "They harvest not flesh but soul. They consume shadows, birth dominion. We are witnesses. We will carry terror forward." His pen tore paper mid-sentence. Marcus Wesley shouted, but no voice left his throat. His shadow peeled away, writhing toward the triplets. He collapsed, body twitching, eyes rolling white as silence harvested what remained inside him. The mountain groaned, wind stilling, trees bending unnaturally. The becoming had spread beyond the cabin. The land itself shifted, compasses spinning, air metallic. Bramble Holler ceased to be geography. It became an altar. The triplets raised their blades toward the moon. Silver light bent downward, drawn unnaturally, feeding their forms. Snow turned black where it touched them, stained by something older than life, older than death. Phineas screamed voicelessly, body collapsing into snow. His shadow joined Thomas's in writhing submission. Silence claimed father and son together, binding generations into a single offering, a single surrender to dominion. Josiah prayed without sound. Faith frayed, yet even prayer faltered. He saw his grandson's husk among others. He knew belief had no power here. Silence demanded only one sacrifice: everything. The becoming climaxed in unison with the 13th toll of the bell. The triplets shed final traces of humanity. What remained was not man, but entity. Silence incarnate, hunger unbound, command absolute. Their silver eyes swept the holler. No cabin, no man, no thought was unseen. Survivors trembled, realizing they had been spared only as witnesses, tools to carry silence into the wider world. Mortimer crawled through snow, eyes hollow, whispering, "They ain't mine. They never were." Silence offered no reply. His body collapsed beside husks of sons and neighbors. He had outlived nothing but regret. The triplets spoke again, words carved into thought. "You will leave. You will tell. You will prepare the next harvest." Silence grows through story. Fear is the seed. Spread it. Survivors staggered back, minds scarred, forced into role. They would carry warning, not salvation. Silence demanded witnesses, for silence spread best through whispered stories, through dread carried into valleys beyond. The snow ceased falling. The moon dimmed. The triplets, now entities, turned eastward, their bodies fading into mist, into light. Bramble Holler lay hushed, emptied, hollowed into monument of silence. Fairfax's journal closed with final line. The becoming has occurred. They are silence unbound. The cycle continues. His script faltered, ink blotched, but meaning remained eternal. Silence was not ended, only begun. When the entities faded into mist, only snow remained, blackened where their feet had stood. Survivors rose unsteadily, hollowed men with eyes heavy from visions no human was built to endure. Phineas Coldbrook stumbled first, leaning against a tree, whispering his son's name. No answer came. The husk of Thomas lay twisted in snow, shadow gone, essence consumed. Phineas wept soundlessly, broken. Josiah Thornvale clutched his chest, staggering through the husks of boys and men alike. His Bible lay frozen somewhere behind, irrelevant now. He muttered, "Faith failed us, silence never does." Dr. Fairfax dragged himself upright, journal pressed to chest, ink freezing across the last entry. He whispered to himself, "If I survive, I must record. The world must know silence walks." Marcus Wesley pressed bloodied hands against his coat, lantern shattered, flame extinguished. He stared into void beyond tree lines. His voice cracked, "This holler's gone. It ain't ours anymore. It belongs to them now." Mortimer Ashbourne lay still near the cabin, chest rising faintly. Whiskey smell clung to him, eyes glassed with tears unshed. He whispered, "Not sons, not mine." Then silence took him too, leaving emptiness. The survivors gathered in the schoolhouse, breath fogging in frigid air. No fire burned. Words stumbled clumsily from lips, fragmented sentences straining against memory that refused to fully take shape without breaking minds. Phineas declared through trembling teeth, "We carry it now. They told us to spread it. If we speak, we feed them. If we hide it, maybe we starve them." Josiah shook his head, whispering, "Silence ain't starved. Silence grows whether spoken or buried. We're already its mouth. We're cursed either way." His eyes reflected lamplight like glass, haunted beyond repair. Fairfax scribbled furiously despite protests, filling pages with diagrams, maps, words describing the transformation. He muttered, "Documentation is resistance. If men know truth, maybe they fight." His voice cracked, betraying disbelief in his own claim. Marcus Wesley argued knowledge invited return. "Words are hooks," he growled. "Every story drags them closer. We're vessels now. We speak, we serve. Better to die silent than live feeding them." Debate rose until Phineas slammed fist on table, shouting, "My son's gone! If I don't tell, what did he die for?" His voice cracked, collapsing into sobs. Silence thickened, reclaiming dominance. The bell tolled once, rope unmoved. All froze, staring. Snow gusted against windows, though air outside remained still. Fairfax whispered, "They're listening. They ain't gone. They're waiting to hear how we carry them." Survivors lowered voices, speaking only in fragments. Each man realized silence had not left. It lived inside, coiled like parasite, feeding on every word uttered, every thought shaped, every fear confessed. Phineas wandered to his cabin that night, revolver heavy in hand. He stood over Thomas's husk, whispering promises of vengeance, yet no bullet could strike shadows. He lowered the weapon, defeated. Josiah returned to his chapel, empty pews echoing with absence. He prayed aloud, but every word faltered into silence. He collapsed against altar, realizing his God had abandoned him, replaced by something hungrier. Fairfax continued writing by lantern, hand blistered, eyes bloodshot. His notes grew incoherent, words blending with symbols. He realized silence bent his script, guiding ink into circles, repeating patterns resembling those carved on shoulders. Marcus Wesley burned his medical books one by one outside his cabin. Flames hissed in snow. He muttered, "Knowledge fed them. Knowledge brought them. Better ignorance than invitation." Smoke carried prayers no one heard. The days passed in hushed paralysis. Cabins abandoned, smoke rising thin. Survivors avoided one another, for even speech risked feeding silence. They communicated through looks, through nods, through trembling hands unwilling to shape sound. One by one, men disappeared. Some walked into snow, never returned. Others were found lifeless, shadows peeled away, expressions blank. Survivors realized silence still harvested, not openly now, but quietly, invisibly, endlessly. Phineas awoke one dawn to Thomas standing in doorway, shadowless, Husk smiling faintly. He screamed voicelessly as vision dissolved. He realized silence haunted memory, replaying sons as puppets. Grief itself became weapon. Josiah saw Samuel in dreams, whispering ancient syllables. He begged forgiveness, but forgiveness never came. Each morning he aged faster, hair whitening, eyes hollow. Silence aged him like rot, feeding on remorse. Fairfax's journal swelled into hundreds of pages, though many unreadable. He realized silence used his hand as instrument, writing its own scripture. He muttered, "I am not author. I am vessel." Marcus Wesley grew skeletal, refusing food, claiming silence tainted it. He whispered, "It feeds off hunger, too." He collapsed one night by extinguished lantern, leaving behind only ashes of books, knowledge burned into futility. By spring thaw, only 3 survivors remained, Phineas, Josiah, and Fairfax. They gathered once more in the schoolhouse, voices cracking. Each knew they carried burden heavier than chains, heavier than coffins. Phineas muttered, "We speak, we spread. We stay silent, it spreads anyway. There ain't no winning." His face sagged, revolver on table, barrel glinting faintly. Hope had long since frozen. Josiah argued faintly, warning others might buy them time. But even as he spoke, words felt unnatural, bent, guided. He fell silent, realizing his voice belonged not to him, but to silence. Fairfax demanded, "We must try. Documentation is survival." He held journal aloft, pages trembling. Yet deep down he knew every line he wrote was already theirs, silence using him as quill, holler as ink. The schoolhouse bell tolled 13 again without touch. Snow outside melted in rings, forming symbols. Survivors froze. They realized the becoming had not ended. It had planted seed, sprouting inside them, waiting to bloom. That night, Phineas vanished. Josiah found his cabin empty, revolver left on table. Tracks led into woods, but ended abruptly, swallowed by snow. No body returned. Silence had claimed him finally. Josiah collapsed weeks later inside chapel, eyes glazed, Bible clutched. Fairfax discovered him, realized even faithless breath fed silence. He buried Josiah shallow, whispering, "You deserved more." Snow-filled grave before morning. Fairfax alone wandered the holler, journal strapped tight, whispering into cold. He wrote feverishly, though his hand no longer his. He knew silence would use him to carry story into valleys beyond. One dawn he departed, lantern dim, journal heavy. He whispered, "If I speak, they spread. If I don't, they still spread. But men must know. I am damned either way." The mountain swallowed him whole. Valleys beyond whispered later of a gaunt doctor who staggered through towns, muttering about triplets, silence, shadows. Some laughed, others listened. The story spread, seed planted. Bramble Holler lay abandoned, cabins rotted, bells rusted, snow covering graves unmarked. But silence still lingered, waiting, humming faintly beneath roots. Travelers felt unease, though none understood. The place had become monument of absence. Generations later, whispers remained. Hunters spoke of silver-eyed figures glimpsed at tree lines, shadows moving against moonlight. Fathers warned sons to never linger in silence too long. But silence always lingered in them regardless. Fairfax's journal surfaced decades later, pages cracked, symbols repeating endlessly. Scholars dismissed it as madness, but readers reported dreams of humming, of silver eyes watching from corners. Silence used ink as doorway. The burden never ended. Survivors had carried it unwillingly, spreading through word, through memory, through fear. Silence did not need armies anymore. It lived in story, in echo, in thought itself. And so the Holler's lesson endured. Some evils feed not on flesh, but on remembrance. Silence grows louder each time spoken, each time feared, each time believed. The survivors had ensured its immortality.